Use duct tape. That's all he said. 3 words, simple, direct. The kind of advice that comes from decades of experience, not from a manual or a training video, but the young Marine just laughed. Actually laughed. Right in the old man's face. "Okay, Grandpa, thanks for the history lesson. We've got modern equipment now. We don't need your ancient tricks." The veteran didn't argue. He just stood there, watching, his weathered hands clasped behind his back, waiting for what he knew was coming. If you understand that wisdom doesn't expire just because the calendar changes, type experience in the comments right now. Because what happened next at that loading dock taught those young Marines a lesson they would never forget. Harold Hank Reardon was 69 years old, and he had spent more time around ammunition than most people spent breathing. 32 years in the United States Army, the vast majority of it in logistics and supply chain operations. He had loaded and unloaded more ordnance than he could possibly count. He had prepared shipments for every theatre of operation from Vietnam to Desert Storm to the early days of the War on Terror. He had seen equipment fail in ways that defied imagination, and he had learned, through trial and error, through close calls and near disasters, exactly what worked and what didn't when lives were on the line. Now retired, living in a modest house just outside Fort Hendricks, Hank made a habit of visiting the base a few times a month. He had friends still serving, younger soldiers he had mentored over the years, and the base commander had given him a standing invitation to drop by whenever he pleased. It was a courtesy extended to few civilians, but Hank Reardon wasn't really a civilian. Not in the ways that mattered. The army was in his blood, in his bones, in the way he walked and talked and thought about the world. Retirement hadn't changed that. It had just changed his wardrobe. Today's visit had started like any other. Coffee with an old friend at the NCO club. A walk through the motor pool to see how the new vehicles were holding up. A stop at the PX to pick up a few items. But as Hank made his way back toward the main gate, something caught his attention. A sound. The distinctive screech of packing tape being pulled from a roll. It was coming from the loading dock adjacent to the ammunition supply point, and something about the rhythm of it didn't sit right with him. Call it instinct. Call it decades of experience creating patterns in his subconscious that he couldn't ignore. Whatever it was, Hank changed direction and headed toward the sound. What he found made his stomach tighten with a familiar mix of concern and frustration. A group of 4 young Marines, 3 men and 1 woman, were working to seal ammunition cases for the transport. The cases themselves were standard military issue, olive-drab metal containers designed to protect their contents from the elements and the rigors of transit. But the tape the Marines were using to seal them was anything but standard. It was thin, transparent. The kind of lightweight packing tape you might use to seal a cardboard box for shipping. The kind that looked clean and modern and absolutely would not survive the conditions these cases would face in the field. Hank watched for a moment, hoping he was wrong. Hoping there was some new protocol he wasn't aware of, some advancement in adhesive technology that made this transparent tape stronger than it appeared. But as he watched one of the Marines struggle to get the tape to adhere properly to the metal surface, watched it peel up at the corners almost immediately, he knew his instincts were right. This was a problem waiting to happen. He approached slowly, not wanting to startle anyone or cause a scene. The Marines were young, probably fresh out of their MOS training, full of confidence and certainty in a way that only the inexperienced could be. The one who seemed to be in charge, a lance corporal with a name tape reading Vickers, noticed Hank first. His expression shifted from curiosity to mild annoyance as he took in the older man's civilian clothes. Khaki pants, a faded army polo shirt, comfortable walking shoes. Just another base visitor, probably someone's grandfather, wandering where he shouldn't be. "Can I help you, sir?" Vickers asked, his tone polite but clearly dismissive. "This is a restricted area. Civilians aren't really supposed to be back here." Hank nodded, acknowledging the point. "I understand. I have authorization from the base commander to be on the grounds, but that's not why I stopped." He gestured toward the cases the Marines were sealing. "I noticed the tape you're using. That clear packing tape won't hold up in transit. Not for ammunition cases, not for anything that's going to see real conditions." Vickers exchanged a glance with one of the other Marines, a private first class named Dominguez. There was a smirk on Dominguez's face, the kind of expression that said he was already composing the story he would tell his buddies later about the confused old man who wandered onto the loading dock with unsolicited advice. "Sir, this is the tape we were issued," Vickers said. "It's the new standard. supposedly stronger than the old stuff and easier to see through for inspection purposes. He emphasized the word standard as if it should end the conversation entirely. Hank shook his head. That tape is designed for controlled environments, climate-controlled warehouses, shipping containers on ships with stable temperatures. The moment those cases hit any real weather, heat, cold, humidity, dust, that adhesive is going to fail. The edges will peel, the seal will break. And when those cases are being transported over rough terrain, loaded and unloaded a dozen times, stacked and restacked, you're going to have ammunition exposed to the elements. That's not just a logistics problem, that's a safety hazard. The female Marine, whose name tape read Johansson, had stopped working and was listening with what seemed like genuine interest. But Vickers waved his hand dismissively. Look, I appreciate the concern, but we're following protocol. This is the tape supply gave us. If there was a problem with it, someone would have told us. He turned back to his work, clearly considering the conversation over. Hank didn't leave. He couldn't. Not when he knew what could happen if these cases failed in the field. Use duct tape, he said simply. Standard military issue duct tape. It's not pretty. It's not modern. But it works. It seals properly against metal surfaces. It holds up in extreme temperatures. It can take abuse that would destroy that clear tape in minutes. The old ways exist because they work. Dominguez actually laughed at that. It wasn't a cruel laugh exactly, but it was dismissive in a way that stung. Okay, Grandpa, thanks for the history lesson. We've got modern equipment now. We don't need your ancient tricks. He held up a roll of the clear tape and waved it like a trophy. This is the future. Probably costs a tenth of what duct tape does and works twice as well. The other Marines, except for Johansson, who looked uncomfortable, chuckled along. Vickers shrugged apologetically at Hank. Sorry, sir. Orders are orders. We use what we're given. Hank stood there for a moment, absorbing the dismissal. Part of him wanted to argue further, to explain in detail the dozens of ways he had seen improper sealing lead to disaster. He remembered a shipment in Kuwait that had been exposed to sandstorms because the seals had failed. Ammunition corroded, rounds compromised. A supply convoy that had been left vulnerable at the worst possible moment. He remembered cases that had been improperly sealed before a river crossing, waterlogged ordnance that had to be destroyed rather than risked. He remembered the paperwork, the investigations, the careers damaged or ended because someone had decided to cut corners on something as simple as tape. But he also remembered being young, being certain, being so confident in his training and his procedures that he couldn't imagine an old-timer knowing something he didn't. He had been Vickers once. He had been Dominguez. And he had learned his lessons the hard way, through mistakes that haunted him still. So instead of arguing, Hank simply stepped back. He found a position near the corner of the loading dock where he could observe without interfering, and he waited. He knew, with the certainty that came from 3 decades of military logistics, that this situation was about to resolve itself. He just had to be patient. 20 minutes passed. The Marines continued their work, sealing case after case with the inadequate tape, stacking them on pallets for transport. The pile grew. Johansson worked efficiently but kept glancing in Hank's direction, her expression thoughtful. She was the only one who seemed to be considering that the old man might have a point. The others had already forgotten he was there. Then the vehicle arrived. It was a staff car, the kind reserved for senior officers, its polished surface gleaming in the afternoon sun. The Marines barely noticed it at first. Staff cars came and went on the base constantly, but when the rear door opened and the figure inside emerged, everything changed. Major General Thomas Bridger stood 6 feet 2 inches tall and carried himself with the kind of authority that couldn't be learned or faked. 2 stars gleamed on his collar. His uniform was immaculate, his bearing perfect, his expression the carefully neutral mask of a man who had spent 40 years leading soldiers in peace and war. He was the base commander, the highest-ranking officer at Fort Hendricks, and his presence on the loading dock was unexpected to say the least. The Marines snapped to attention so quickly that Dominguez nearly dropped the roll of tape he was holding. Vickers looked like he might stop breathing entirely. Even the air seemed to grow still as General Bridger approached the group. His eyes swept across the scene, the stacked cases, the rolls of clear tape, the frozen Marines, and landed on the older man standing quietly in the corner. And then something happened that made no sense to the young Marines at all. General Bridger's face broke into a wide, genuine smile. He walked past the Marines without acknowledging them, crossed the loading dock in long strides, and extended his hand to the old man in civilian clothes. Hank Reardon, I should have known I'd find you here. Hank shook the General's hand warmly. Tom, good to see you. Been a while since you had time for coffee. Being a 2-star has its drawbacks, Bridger replied, but I always have time for you. You're the reason I made it past Captain. He turned to face the Marines, who were still standing at rigid attention, their faces cycling through various shades of confusion and growing alarm. At ease, all of you. But stay right where you are. I have a feeling there's something educational about to happen here. Bridger walked to the nearest pallet of sealed ammunition cases. He examined the clear tape, running his finger along one of the seals. With minimal effort, barely a fraction of the force that would be applied during normal transport, he peeled the tape away from the metal surface. It came off smoothly, easily, leaving behind a faint residue but no real seal at all. He held up the loose strip of tape for the Marines to see. This, he said, his voice carrying the weight of command, is not adequate. This is a disaster waiting to happen. This is ammunition, actual ordnance that soldiers will depend on in the field, sealed with tape that I just removed using 2 fingers in approximately 3 seconds. He let the tape fall to the ground. Can any of you tell me why this is acceptable? Vickers swallowed hard. Sir, this is the tape we were issued. Standard supply item. We were told... You were told, Bridger interrupted, not harshly but firmly. And you followed what you were told without question, which is sometimes appropriate. But you were also given advice by an experienced individual, and you dismissed that advice, laughed at it from what I understand. He glanced at Hank, who gave a slight nod of confirmation. Would you like to know who you laughed at, Lance Corporal? Vickers looked like he very much did not want to know, but he nodded anyway. General Bridger placed a hand on Hank's shoulder. This is Master Sergeant Harold Reardon, retired. 32 years of service, the majority of it in logistics and supply. He served in Vietnam, where he kept ammunition flowing to forward operating bases under conditions you cannot imagine. He served in Panama, in the Gulf War, in Somalia, in Kosovo. He has forgotten more about military logistics than most people will ever learn. The General's voice hardened slightly. He has also received the Meritorious Service Medal 3 times, the Army Commendation Medal 4 times, and was personally recognized by 2 different secretaries of the Army for innovations in supply chain management that saved countless lives and millions of dollars. When Master Sergeant Reardon tells you to use duct tape, the appropriate response is not laughter. The appropriate response is, yes, Master Sergeant, followed by immediate action. The colour had drained completely from Dominguez's face. Vickers looked like he wanted the loading dock to open up and swallow him whole. Even Johansson, who had been the most receptive to Hank's advice, seemed stunned by the full scope of who she had been talking to. Hank stepped forward, raising a hand to forestall any apologies. General, if I may. Bridger nodded, deferring to the older man despite outranking him in the traditional sense. Rank, Hank had always believed, wasn't really about the insignia you wore. It was about the respect you had earned through action. These Marines did nothing wrong, per se, Hank said. They followed their orders. They used the supplies they were issued. They trusted the system. He walked to one of the pallets and picked up a roll of the clear tape, examining it. The problem isn't with them. It's with whoever decided that this tape was adequate for field conditions. Somewhere along the line, someone made a cost-cutting decision without understanding the operational implications. These young people are just the end result of that decision. He set the tape down and looked at Vickers directly. That said, son, part of being a good Marine, part of being a good soldier in any branch is knowing when to question what you're told. Not everything that comes from supply is gospel. Not every protocol is written by people who understand field conditions. Your job isn't just to follow orders blindly. It's to use your judgment, your training, and yes, the experience of those who came before you to make sure the mission succeeds. Vickers nodded slowly. His earlier confidence completely evaporated. Master Sergeant, I apologize. We were disrespectful. I was disrespectful. You tried to help us, and we dismissed you because we thought we knew better. Dominguez stepped forward as well. I'm sorry too, Master Sergeant. What I said was out of line. I was being arrogant. He looked at the rolls of clear tape scattered around the loading dock. You were right. This tape isn't going to cut it. We should have listened. Johansson spoke up for the first time since the General's arrival. I believed you, Master Sergeant. I didn't say anything because I didn't want to contradict the others, but I believed you. That was wrong of me too. I should have spoken up, Hank smiled, and it softened his weathered face considerably. Believing isn't enough if you don't act on it. But the fact that you recognize the truth even when others didn't, that's a good instinct. Develop it. Trust it. It'll serve you well. General Bridger had been observing the exchange with obvious approval. Now he stepped forward again, addressing the Marines directly. I want all of this clear tape removed from these cases immediately. We'll reseal them with proper materials. Duct tape, as Master Sergeant Reardon suggested. I'm also going to be having a conversation with our supply chain about how this particular product made it onto our approved list in the first place. He paused, his expression growing more contemplative. More importantly, I want each of you to remember this moment. Remember what it felt like to dismiss someone's advice based on their appearance. Remember how wrong you were. And remember that the next time someone who looks like they might know something tries to help you, the smart move is to listen first and judge later. The Marines acknowledged the order with a unified "Yes, sir," and immediately began the process of removing the inadequate tape from the sealed cases. Hank watched them work for a moment, then turned to walk away. He had said his piece. The lesson had been learned. There was nothing more for him to contribute here. But Vickers caught up with him before he could leave. The young Lance Corporal's expression was earnest, stripped of all the earlier arrogance. "Master Sergeant, wait, please." Hank stopped and turned. "What is it, son?" Vickers struggled for words for a moment. I wanted to ask, would you be willing to show us? The right way to seal these cases, I mean. The way you would have done it. I want to learn. We all do." He gestured back at the other Marines who had paused in their work and were watching the exchange. "Not because the General ordered it, because you were right and we were wrong, and I don't want to make the same mistake again. Any of us." Hank studied the young man's face, looking for any trace of insincerity and finding none. What he saw instead was something he recognized from a long time ago, the willingness to learn, the humility that came from having one's assumptions shattered, the beginning of real wisdom. "Get me some duct tape and a few empty cases," Hank said finally. "I'll show you what 30 years of trial and error looks like." The demonstration that followed lasted almost an hour. Hank walked the Marines through every step of properly sealing ammunition cases for field transport. He showed them techniques for ensuring maximum adhesion. He explained the importance of overlapping tape at the corners where stress was greatest. He demonstrated how to create a seal that could withstand extreme temperatures, moisture, dust, and the constant vibration of transport over rough terrain. And as he taught, something remarkable happened. The barriers between generations dissolved. Vickers asked thoughtful questions. Dominguez took notes. Johansson demonstrated natural aptitude for the techniques and began helping her fellow Marines apply what they were learning. Even the fourth Marine, a quiet private named Chen who had barely spoken during the entire incident, opened up and shared observations from his own limited experience. By the time they finished, every ammunition case had been properly sealed. The pallets looked different now, less sleek perhaps, with the grey strips of duct tape replacing the transparent modern alternative, but Hank knew from experience that these cases would survive whatever conditions they encountered. More importantly, the Marines who had sealed them now understood why. General Bridger had observed the entire demonstration from a respectful distance. As Hank finished up and prepared to leave for good, the General approached him again. "You know," Bridger said quietly, "I could use someone with your expertise on a more regular basis. Consulting work, training sessions, maybe even some curriculum development for the logistics school. Interested?" Hank considered the offer. He had been retired for years now, content with his quiet life and his occasional visits to the base. But standing here, having just passed knowledge to a new generation, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. Connection. The sense that he still had something valuable to contribute. "I might be," he said slowly. "Let me think about it. But Tom, these young people, they're good. They just need guidance. They need to understand that the old ways aren't outdated. They're tested. They're proven. There's a reason we did things the way we did them, and that reason is usually written in somebody's blood." Bridger nodded solemnly. "That's exactly why we need people like you. People who remember. People who can bridge the gap between what was and what is." As Hank walked away from the loading dock, Vickers called out one final time, "Master Sergeant." Hank turned. "Thank you," the young Lance Corporal said simply, "for not giving up on us, for staying even after we were stupid." Hank smiled. "Son, I've been stupid more times than you've had hot meals. The difference between a fool and a wise man isn't that the wise man never makes mistakes. It's that he learns from them. You learned today. That's what matters." The sun was setting over Fort Hendricks as Hank made his way back to his car. Behind him, he could hear the sounds of the Marines continuing their work, their voices carrying a different energy now. There was respect in those voices, understanding, the beginning of the kind of hard-won wisdom that could only come from experience, either your own or someone else's, if you were smart enough to listen. The ammunition would reach its destination properly sealed, the cases would hold. The soldiers who depended on that ordnance would have one less thing to worry about in whatever hostile environment they found themselves facing. And somewhere in the back of their minds, those 4 young Marines would carry a lesson that went far beyond tape and metal boxes. They would remember the old man who had tried to help them. They would remember how wrong they had been to dismiss him. And maybe, years from now, when they encountered their own Hank Reardon, their own voice of experience in unfamiliar clothing, they would listen first and judge later. Some lessons can only be taught by those who have already walked the difficult road. Some wisdom can only be earned through years of trial and error. And some things, like the importance of respecting experience, of listening to those who came before us, of understanding that newer isn't always better, never go out of style. If you believe that experience deserves respect, that the old ways often exist for good reasons, and that we should never be too proud to learn from those who came before us, then subscribe to this channel. Because stories like this one happen every day, in every corner of the world where generations meet and wisdom is passed from one to another. And those stories deserve to be told.